Like anyone who thinks they're going to be travelling around the world without having been vaccinated, like your vaccination status is going to be a thing. You're not getting a visa unless you have been double dosed. And whether people like that or it's a terrible attack on their civil liberties, like this is people die.
I didn't grant the exemptions. The Chief Health Officer granted the exemptions.
The Taliban was still coming at us. So I made a decision to try and draw enemy fire onto myself. It must have been a great plan because I had an Australian soldier next to me and I conveyed what I was about to do to him. And I still remember the look on his face. But I remember standing up, hearing that very familiar sound of a bullet as it travels past your head. It's like a whip cracking. Hearing that and start running along this hill. The purpose behind this was to draw enemy fire away. And it's one of those things that worked. I did that run, if you will, 40 to 50 meters 3 times. And it's like if you're watering the garden with a garden hose of bullets hitting around my mate and the team that was trying to treat him whilst they're trying to drag him off the hill, to then switching to me, a target that was out in the open.
G'day and welcome to episode 60 of The Other Side, your look at the news and opinion from an Aussie classical liberal centre-right perspective. And not only is it our 60th episode, it's also our first birthday. And I'm having mixed feelings about it, I've got to say, because although I'm encouraged by the growth and success of the show from 200 listeners a week to 5,000 to 10,000 listeners and viewers per episode in just a year, and that's because of you guys, I'm a bit sad that we're still here lamenting all the same things. The loss of our liberty, the rise of the nanny state mentality in Australia and the love of big government, and the lack of understanding in our country of the need to actually work to protect freedom. That freedom is not a given, and that government will never give freedom to you. It's an inalienable right that you have to protect. While more and more Aussies seem to be waking up slowly, I reckon my old 70% pro-lockdown, 30% anti-lockdown estimate is now running at about 60-40. This week has been probably one of the worst ever for the rights of the ordinary Aussie, and it really makes me sad. Also, what's happened in Afghanistan, or should I say what the Biden administration has let happen in Afghanistan, is just another nail in the coffin for the effectiveness of democracy and the reputation and power of liberal democracy and Western civilization around the world. We've got a very special interview today with Australia's 99th Victoria Cross for Bravery winner, Corporal Daniel Kieran. Corporal Kieran won the VC for his courage under fire in Afghanistan in 2010. It's a fantastic story and he'll share it with us later. He'll also tell us what it feels like for our returned Aussie vets watching what's going on over in Afghanistan right now. This will be our only episode for this week. We need a bit of a breather, a bit of a birthday break, and we want to give everyone a chance to catch up because we have pumped out a lot of content this past month or so, not just The Other Side, but also the entire Discernible platform. So please do watch episodes 57, 58 and 59 and catch up on those because they have a lot of good stuff in them, including a really good interview with Professor Joe Siracusa on Afghanistan, which I think you'll really like. The arrogance of our state premiers and the culture of the Labor Party at a state level seems to know no bounds, although Gladys Berejiklian has given them a run for their money, I've got to say. This was Daniel Andrews on Monday at his news conference. I want you to watch not just what he's saying, but the language he's using and the manner and style of his delivery.
Or do you envisage, I suppose, that big events like a Grand Prix will be only for those vaccinated?
Well, there's some work being done by National Cabinet, and I had part of that conversation with the Prime Minister yesterday. I think we'll have some further discussions this week, he and I, about how some of those things can work. I think that it is a restaurant or a major event that is only attended by people that are double vaccinated is always going to be a safer event and going to contribute less to people being in hospital. So I think the time is coming where your vaccination status will matter. You've already seen airlines, the other airlines in terms of flights. The other thing too is, like anyone who thinks they're going to be travelling around the world without having been vaccinated, like your vaccination status is going to be a thing. You're not getting a visa unless you have been double dosed. And whether people like that or it's a terrible attack on their civil liberties, like this is people die when they get this. So there are limits on choices that are made that they're not your choices in many ways. I mean that in the absolute literal sense. They're choices that affect you, yes, but they're made by you, but they affect so many others. And that's where that difficult balance has to come forward.
And that's where I'd humbly disagree. Yes, there are some things in life where the actions of the community have to override the freedoms and rights of individuals. But not everyone believes this virus is dangerous enough to warrant the extreme actions being taken. And lockdowns are extreme. Mandated vaccination is extreme. Closing borders within our country, closing our country to the rest of the world, and restrictions on freedom of movement are extreme. It seems a lot of people have started to forget that as they've become more normalised, these measures. And that's troubling in itself. There also seems to be no clear guidelines as to what's going to happen when as we move forward. And this actually isn't forgivable by the excuse that, we just don't know what the variables are going to be at the time. You have to have a plan that you work off, and then you moderate that plan later on. That's how you run a crisis. So there do have to be clear guidelines so that people can plan, right? So that businesses can plan, even so that families can plan vacations, or people can plan when to have elective surgery or when to get treatment for other conditions. I mean, are we reopening at 70%, 80%? And what is the scope of that reopening going to be? The leadership void at the federal level on this is utterly unforgivable. This next question at Dan Andrews' news conference was by far my favourite of the whole thing. Have a listen.
Just to clarify on that point about 70% and reopening, is the plan at 70%, which is a couple of months away, is it to allow those? What's the plan at 70%? Will it proceed to ease up despite the case numbers?
Yeah, Dan. What is the plan? And more importantly, how come you and the Prime Minister, to be fair, still seem to be hedging your bets and not giving us clear scenario guidelines so we can plan our lives and businesses?
Well, once you get to 70% double dose, but more importantly, frankly, 80%, 70% is a marker, but the really significant shifts don't occur until you get to the 80%. And indeed, hopefully we can go beyond that, because every extra dose helps. Ultimately, what we're going to move to is a pandemic that's applicable to everybody. It's going to move to a pandemic of the unvaccinated. The smaller the unvaccinated group is, the more manageable from a health service point of view those inevitable positive cases will be, and very serious illness. Look around the rest of the world. That is every reason to get vaccinated. At the moment, we don't have enough, but that will change soon.
Okay, yes, we know there will be fewer people getting sick when we're mostly vaccinated. But the question, Mr. Premier, was what happens with policy when we get to 70%? And a nice, clear answer would be just swell.
I'm just trying to clarify though, if it's 70%...
So at 70% you can ease in some areas. 80% is when there's really significant change. And yes, we do move away from every single case matters to the point of, we're being obsessively focused on every single one. We move much more to a system that's about trying to balance and preserve sufficient capacity in the hospital. So hospitalisations become, in many respects, a more meaningful measure.
But the changes
But only when you've got the safety net of having 8 out of 10 eligible people having been through the vaccination system.
So changes are triggered at 70 despite case numbers?
Yeah, the national plan's very clear.
Yeah, what's wrong with you? The national plan is so very, very clear.
When you get to 70, you've got more options. There are things you can do you can't do now. Lockdowns are not impossible, but they're less likely. That's the wording I think that is used. At 80%, well, you wouldn't be locking down the whole community to keep safe those who wouldn't keep themselves safe by going and getting vaccinated.
And borders reopening, 70 or 80?
Not necessarily, because I think you might find that this is the frustrating thing, right? You can have a national plan, it can be backed up by modelling, it can be, a tome of a thing, right? But it will depend on what's happening at that time. And if we get to a situation where, it ran rife through an unvaccinated community and we literally had thousands of people in hospital, well, then we would have to look at that. You can't just pretend that isn't happening. And that'll be the really challenging part. How do you balance opening up, giving people freedom? That will promote infection. And if you've got too few people vaccinated at that point, or too few vulnerable people, I think you understand the point I'm making, then you will finish up with many, many people very ill, and they will finish up in hospital.
And the end of that sentence should be, and our hospitals cannot cope. 18 months after COVID first arrived on our shores, we still have no plan for temporary hospital facilities in most states, emergency staffing, ensuring that there's enough equipment to deal with thousands of serious cases. Instead, they're wasting money destroying the economy on lockdowns instead of spending it building these health facilities. In Western Australia and Queensland in particular, ambulance ramping in peacetime conditions is appalling. So they could be spending this money. It's needed. Our leaders have been playing politics for 18 months instead of getting our health facilities ready, and they are a state government responsibility. And our health departments seem to be full of woke bureaucrats more concerned with gender and racial diversity issues than actual measurable health outcomes. That's the job taxpayers are paying you to do, guys. And that, my friends, is why you are being locked down. It's why you can't see dying relatives interstate, why kids can't play in the playground, go to school, and have a normal childhood, because of government incompetence and deficiency at a state and federal level. The kind of incompetence that the competition and demands of a free market system would have never allowed to occur. Because in the free market, you only make a profit. Ooh, evil profit. Profit motive is one of the best things ever. You only make a profit if you get the job done and you deliver value to your customers. And pretty quickly, you won't make a profit if you stuff it up. That's why the free market works. Now, maybe free markets aren't perfect, but they couldn't create worse outcomes than this utter shambles we're seeing now. Meanwhile, Queensland's Anastasia Palaszczuk seems to think that it's essential to keep Queensland residents locked out of their own state, unable to go home, unable to see their own families, no rights whatsoever. But it's totally okay to fly in a plane with 100 NRL players, officials, and their wives and girlfriends. Here's how Channel 10's The Project covered that one.
We want people to come home when it's safe to do so.
Yep, they only want people coming in when it's safe, or when it's footy finals time, or when there's a cricket comp on. Those guys got exemptions too.
I didn't grant the exemptions, the Chief Health Officer granted the exemptions.
Wow. The arrogance, the abdication of responsibility. What a disgusting performance. In the most pathetic spin doctoring I think I've ever seen, Palaszczuk argued that there are two different caps for entering the state. There's a little cap over here and then there's another little cap over here. There's one for the state's actual citizens who are trying to get home, and there's one for sports people from Sydney.
We have made that very, very clear that the exemptions are separate to that cap.
Queensland State Opposition Leader David Crisafulli pointed out the obvious flaw in that logic.
If there's room for sporting families, there's room for Queensland families. End of story.
But Queen Anastasia wasn't letting her feathers be ruffled by common sense.
We want people to come home when it's safe to do so.
Look at that smile. Wow. She takes smug to a whole new level, doesn't she? So these sensitive, caring, compassionate, kinder than thou left-wing politicians, just ask your left-wing friends how kind and compassionate they are. They'll tell you. They'll tell you how much more kind and compassionate they are than you are, that's for sure. But these politicians, they don't really seem to care about any of the kindness and compassion when someone dares to disagree with them. Matt Fox is a dad and a small business owner from Noosa on Queensland's Sunshine Coast. His story of being turned into a criminal because of a petty political protest action has gone viral internationally, as if Australia needs any more embarrassment at the moment. Here's how Matt explained what happened to him and what he did on his social media.
On the 3rd of August this year, I documented on my Instagram stories the fact that children's outdoor playgrounds were being shut down. Children were not allowed to use them, and that parents would be fined for doing so.
This was on the playground just down the road from where I live, which is where children exercise outside. Playground closed. Don't think it's closed anymore. Playground open.
In this video, I voiced my frustrations at the fact that my 4-year-old son and millions of others around Australia could not use an outdoor playground to get the physical, mental and social stimulation they desperately need in these troubled times, especially when they are not allowed to attend school, kindergarten, daycare, friends' homes, family members' homes, and now the playgrounds. Due to the actions on the video of throwing away the sign, I had Noosa Police turn up at my house at 6 a.m. the following day. I'm now facing criminal charges, a criminal conviction, and expensive court appearances. My integrity has been questioned. I was DNA swabbed, fingerprinted, and had a mugshot taken. The treatment is what you would expect in communist China.
Not sure communist China is that bad, actually. No, it is. I'm just kidding. It really is. But one thing they do love to do over in China is create so many rules that good, honest citizens end up tied up in them and with criminal convictions. It's one of the hallmarks of nailing your political opponents in totalitarian states.
But now I'm facing very serious criminal charges of stealing. It carries a maximum 5-year jail term.
Yeah, and those laws were never intended to be used by political parties for political policing purposes. Where is the common sense? Why are our police putting up with this and executing on these ridiculous orders? Once upon a time, police would just say, okay, we'll let that one slide. That's a bit silly. It's a community thing. We can keep that out of the courts and not clog up the system so we can go and fight some real crime. There are a few home invasions happening in Queensland, I understand, lately. Do our pollies realise the damage that all this does to the reputation of our hardworking police? Turning the police into a political Gestapo is not exactly confidence building in our national institutions and our state institutions. And most police, except for a small minority of power trippers, absolutely hate this stuff.
Evidence has been presented that in the last week alone, just one single week, Kids Helpline counsellors received over 10,000 calls for help. The helpline has had to double the number of counsellors they have on board. These innocent Australian children need a sense of normality in this very strange world. I didn't realise how much of an effect it has on children and me until I saw my son run into the playground so excited about one of his favourite times of the day, only to be faced with a sign stating, "Playground closed."
Like I said, I'm tired of making the same points about proportionality and considering all the unintended consequences of lockdowns. We make that point over and over again, so I won't. Just watch episode 57 if you haven't already. Now here's a good use of police resources. This is a Queensland police video of the moment they found a woman trying to get across the New South Wales-Queensland border, smuggled in the boot of a car.
Jump out, mate. There's someone in the back here, mate. Jump out. Are you the only one in there? I'm going to be nice to you. There's no need to be rude. I've just asked you to hop out. It's towing a number of things that look like it's furniture, which makes it appear to me that someone's trying to move to Queensland. So do you understand that you're not allowed in Queensland at the moment? Can I ask you if you didn't know that while you were hiding in a boot?
The boot lady. The Courier Mail reports that Zoe Burford went public with her explanation as to why she breached the New South Wales-Queensland border on foot and then helped to smuggle her mum Paula back in from South Australia in a car boot. Zoe is from Warwick in Queensland, the Darling Downs area. She flew to South Australia about a month ago to help her homeless mum get into Queensland to access medical treatment for what she feared was bowel cancer. Her mum had lost about 13 kilos and was hemorrhaging. The blood tests she had ruled out an infection. So bowel cancer was a probable diagnosis. So they were driving back to Queensland from South Australia. She picked her mum up to take her back to home so she can get treatment in Queensland and she could look after her and be with her. She's got 5 kids, Zoe. So she couldn't be away from them for too long. So they're driving back to Queensland through Western New South Wales. They got to Moree and then the Queensland border was slammed shut. If you believe that it's ethical or even legal to shut our state borders to residents, then you probably think that's all fair and good. I frankly don't. I think that's actually not okay. They spent weeks trying to get back in legitimately, doing all the paperwork, getting all the stuff. But they finally gave up and tried the boot smuggling approach, and they got caught. And police issued Paula with a notice to appear in Warwick Magistrates Court, charged with failing to comply with a public health direction, and they fined Zoe $4,135. Paula later pleaded guilty, and she was also fined $4,135. I'd call that Labor government looking after the little guy, wouldn't you? Labor government looking after the Aussie battler. Labor government in touch with its base and its needs. We'll slap an $8,270 fine on your family while you've got 5 kids and you're a single mum and your mum's going through possible bowel cancer and bowel cancer treatment. What a lovely, kind, compassionate mentality must reign at the top of bureaucracy and Labor government thinking. It's fantastic, isn't it? This is not one country. We are not a single country anymore, and we're not a liberal democracy. We just can't call ourselves that. We're a loose federation of 6 very independent, authoritarian democratic states. Authoritarian democracy. That's what we live under. That's not an opinion. That's just a statement of the current political reality in Australia. My opinion is that I don't like it. That is an opinion. And we need to do something about it. What is the trauma that families experience when a child is captivated by the modern woke trans agenda? A new report from the anti-critical gender theory group, Binary Australia, contains the harrowing account of a family whose teenage daughter was swept up in the trend. One mother, identified in the report as Judith, says her daughter, aged 17 at the time, came out as transgender in 2018, after 3 years of poor mental health, including diagnoses of anxiety, depression, and bipolar disorder. This was reportedly completely out of the blue. Her mother said she'd never shown any masculine tendencies throughout her earlier childhood. The same week that Judith's daughter said she was suicidal, she was admitted to hospital, but she was granted day release the next day. The hospital staff immediately affirmed her transgender identity when she was admitted, without any question or any curiosity. Hospital staff insulted the parents, accused them of being transphobic. There's a fictional Orwellian word, if ever there was one. And even falsified documents stating that they consented to a referral for hormone medication. Judith's 13-year-old son suffered enormously with the fallout of all of this. Now, the details of Judith's story and many others are featured in a new publication from Binary Australia called Australian Perspectives on Transgendering Children and Adolescents. Binary says it's clear there's a system of brainwashed healthcare staff quick to encourage compliance to a political ideology that robs young people of their health and their fertility via extreme drug intervention and body mutilation surgery. While gender dysphoria may be real, it says, and adults are free to choose to do whatever they want with their own bodies, the practice of conducting radical surgery and drug treatments on children without their parents' consent simply cannot be allowed. Nor can those suffering mental illness be rushed through gender transformation because 1 or 2 overzealous doctors and psychologists have subscribed to the latest pop theory. Oh yes, your mental illness is obviously a result of gender dysphoria. And what a coincidence! I happen to be an expert in gender disorders. To a moron with a hammer, everything is a nail. We need to allow parents and friends to step in when a patient is too mentally weak or suffering too much to be able to assess the truth of their own condition. and professionals need to have proper guidelines for assessment. 90 retired United States generals and admirals are demanding that US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley resign following the disastrous handling of the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. The demand has come in an open letter published just hours before we recorded the show this week. The letter says their demand is based on negligence in performing their duties. They went on to say what they believed should have happened, that the withdrawal should not have been rushed and the Bagram Air Base should never have been abandoned. They also said Milley and Austin should have advised Biden against the withdrawal in the strongest possible terms. If they did not do everything within their authority to stop the hasty withdrawal, they should resign, the letter demands. Retired Army Ranger Brian Mast is a US congressman. He served in Afghanistan. He spoke to Fox News as the caskets containing the bodies of 13 American service members killed in the Kabul airport terrorist attack was ongoing.
It's impossible to watch, especially when it was this senseless, this preventable, and entirely the result of something that none of our service members ever had. They were never intimidated.
A number of the families who talked to the Washington Post said, you know, the president came in and talked to us. We lost our loved ones, and he kept talking about Bo, and he kept checking his watch, they said. The New York Post today says the president, looking at his watch, says it all. He can't wait to move on.
Some of the fathers of those killed in the Kabul terrorist attacks appeared on Fox News to tell the story of what they saw with Joe Biden and his watch checking.
First, I just want to say that Jared has exemplified so much that any man could ever strive for, and made me so proud to watch him undertake this endeavor and going into the Marine Corps. And he completed his boot camp, went to Jordan, was excited about that, and was constantly looking to do more, and was given that opportunity.
I can't imagine the pain that both of you are living through, and I'm very sorry about that. Mark, you met with Biden over the weekend. How did that go?
Well, initially I wasn't going to meet with him, but then I felt I owed it to my son to at least have some words with him about how I felt. And it didn't go well. He talked a bit more about his own son than he did my son, and that didn't sit well with me.
It's the absolute worst feeling in the world. Having them be away for so long and doing the job that they all love, there's no doubt about it. Being a Marine to these guys is everything. And having this happen to these heroes, every one of them's a hero. There's no doubt. Every last one of them. They died with their brothers and their sisters right next to them, doing exactly what they all wanted to do, and that is defending this country.
America's national treasure. That's how I refer to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
You chose not to meet with President Biden. I don't know if you want to comment on that. And I'd like to know, when I saw Biden look at his watch, I was literally like, you got to be kidding me. Because all of this to me was preventable. Because we saw them on the march. You know, we had April, May, June, July to extradite everybody and our equipment. We didn't do it. There's no excuse to me for this. Why did you choose not to meet with the president, Darren?
For exactly the reasons you just gave. We said absolutely not. We didn't want to deal with him. We didn't want him anywhere near us. We as a family decided that that was the way it was going to be. In reference to the checking of his watch, that didn't happen just once. That happened on every single one that came out of that airplane. It happened on every single one of them. They would release the salute, and he'd look down at his watch. On every last one, all 13, he looked down at his watch.
I actually leaned into my son's mother's ear and I said, I swear to God, if he checks his watch one more time, and that was only probably 4 times in, I couldn't look at him anymore after that. Just considering especially the time and why we were there, it was, I found to be the most disrespectful thing I've ever seen.
Biden's bungled withdrawal has also left a weapons treasure trove for the Taliban. Their military capabilities have now been bolstered significantly by ultra-modern weaponry left behind by the Americans. Republican Congressman Jim Banks pinned the blame firmly on Joe Biden.
We now know that due to the negligence of this administration, the Taliban now has access to over $85 billion worth of American military equipment. That includes 75,000 vehicles, over 200 airplanes and helicopters, over 600,000 small arms and light weapons. The Taliban now has more Black Hawk helicopters than 85% of the countries in the world. But they don't just have weapons. They also have night vision goggles, body armor, medical supplies, and unbelievably, unfathomable to me and so many others, is that the Taliban now has biometric devices, which have the fingerprints, eye scans, and the biographical information of the Afghans who helped us over the last 20 years. And here's what we just learned again in the briefing that we just walked out of, is this administration still has no plan to get this military equipment or these supplies back.
Nice work, Joe. With that sort of planning and execution and strategy, you could run an Australian state's COVID response. You'd fit right in with the rest of them. President Trump's Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, explained the plan that his boss had for getting out of Afghanistan.
Our plan always included an orderly, conditions-based withdrawal. It would have certainly included making sure we got the sequencing right, the sequencing on Bagram, the sequencing on civilians versus military, and of course it included the central thesis that we were going to make sure we got every American out. And also President Trump wanted to make sure that we didn't leave $80 billion in equipment behind as well. We were determined to get all the Americans out to make sure we got our equipment, that we were never threatened by our own equipment again.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo speaking to Fox News this week. President Trump himself had this to say.
I would have taken the equipment out, I would have taken the people out, and then we would have bombed every base but Bagram. We had to keep that because that's near China and Iran. So we were going to keep that for other purposes. I mean, they spent $10 billion building Bagram, and then they handed it out overnight. They give them the keys. I've never heard any. I have never seen stupidity like this. And they're trying to now, the narrative, Biden got out like he's brave. He got out like a man that was just fleeing for his life. This is the United States of America. All over the world, they're laughing at us because of the way. Withdrawal is fine, but you withdraw with dignity and with victory.
Former President Donald Trump on the US Todd Starnes radio show. 42 Australian soldiers lost their lives in Afghanistan during the 20-year war. One of them was Lance Corporal Jared McKinney, who was fatally wounded in a 3-hour fight against the Taliban at Darapet on August the 24th, 2010, and was one of the most intense battles that was fought by Australians in Afghanistan. Now, during that battle, another soldier, Corporal Daniel Kieran, repeatedly broke cover to draw enemy gunfire onto himself for 2 reasons. Firstly, to help his colleagues determine where the enemy was, and secondly, to stop them firing on the other members of their patrol who were treating the injured Lance Corporal McKinney after he'd been seriously wounded. For that bravery, Corporal Kieran rightly won Australia's 99th Victoria Cross. I spoke to Daniel Kieran recently and began by asking him, what does it feel like as an Australian veteran of the Afghanistan conflict to watch how this withdrawal has all played out?
It was heartbreaking. You know, I served with a lot of the Afghan National Army soldiers. I was there as a mentor for my last tour. training them tactics, techniques, procedures to look after the security of their own country, to see what has happened in Kabul and to see those images. It was absolutely heartbreaking. My thoughts and prayers are out and go out to those that have been affected.
How do you think other veterans are feeling at the moment, and what's the vibe among the Australian Afghanistan veteran community at the moment?
That is the question. And I've had so many mates reach out to me and message me asking if I'm okay, and I can honestly say I certainly haven't been affected adversely by my service. My message to the veterans at the moment that serve, certainly in Afghanistan, is your service was worth it. It was valued. We had 20 years, that's 20 generations of Afghan people experiencing what it is like, or it's showing them a different way. And I hope that over those last 20 years, that will mean something to how the Taliban go about what they're about to do in the country. Hopefully it shapes, influences what's about to happen, because it is uncharted territory we're in now. Civil war, warlords, all those things that have been prevalent in Afghanistan, they're all still there. The Taliban never disappeared. They were there the entire 20 years. We fought them in the middle of nowhere, some of the most arduous territory and conditions. They were in the city centres. So they've been there for the last 20 years. For the veterans that served, you did make a difference. That's my message today.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's the time of that. I mean, it's a number of things, isn't it? I mean, as the Prime Minister said the other day, Australians who fight for freedom are never fighting in vain, ever. There's always some benefit. And in this case, quite a significant benefit, because it was 20 years that we denied terrorists a place to sort of, gather and grow their crews, so to speak. But more than that, we also participated in a campaign of rebuilding and a campaign of security for Afghanis and for the people of Afghanistan to I guess experience a Taliban-free existence for at least an entire generation, and that's got to have an impact, hasn't it?
Look, it does. There's so many questions about, was it worth it? And I've already said, look, absolutely it was worth it for those veterans that watched this. Absolutely worth it. We went to Afghanistan, and I did see John Howard's interview. Absolutely agree with his comments. We went there to stem the flow of terrorism. We went there to pursue Osama bin Laden. We didn't know at the time that he probably ducked across the border to Pakistan in early 2002. But we went there to stop the training camps, to stop the freedom of movement. We achieved that. We then went into a nation-building exercise. I was fortunate enough to do 2 separate tours. And between my first and second, I saw the change, the physical change in the population, kids going to school, smiles on their faces, infrastructure projects, hospitals. There was hope, and I saw that change. And I was fortunate to be part of that. I saw my role to start with as someone that was fighting for human rights. In a way, I was there out on the ground, risking my own life, and soldiers that served with me as well. That's what we were doing. We were there to help the Afghan people, without a doubt, and we did that whilst we were in country.
Dan, the time span between your 2 tours of duty, what was the gap between them?
So 2007, so I was across with the Special Forces, a very different mission then, and then back in 2010. So that mission in 2010 was part of mentoring Task Force 1, so it changed from rebuilding in a way to mentoring. And the strategy at that point in time was to train as many Afghan National Army soldiers as we could,
right, to
enable them to then provide security for their country. Now, there's a whole different range of reasons as to what has just happened. There was some 300,000 Afghan troops trained. I was responsible for training some of them. I know they got great training. My experiences, I've done 10 years into the Defence Force at that point in time and imparted that knowledge into the troops that I trained. If the question is what happened, let's look at the domino effect of corruption to start with, of ANA soldiers not getting supplied what they needed, I know I've had first-hand account stories told to me from the soldiers whilst I was in country going, our commanders are stealing our pay. The soldiers weren't getting paid. Resupply, fuel, bullets wasn't getting through. There were so many challenges, the lack of national identity, the list goes on. So I really do feel for the country and what state it's in at the moment.
Taliban also had a very strong hold in most regional and rural areas, didn't they? They brought a degree of security to people, and when when your basic needs are not being met, it's very easy for political actors to get support, I guess, just by providing fundamental and basic security.
Look, and I've had so many conversations exactly around that subject of if you have very little or nothing, and I grew up with not much at all. I grew up with laws and no man's power. I know what it's like to grow up tough. You look to the closest agency, closest person, whoever can provide that security, support, whatever it is. If it wasn't the coalition forces, it was the Taliban. So I can see if the Australian forces or coalition patrolled during the day, the Taliban would be there at night. It was as simple as that. So we were fighting against, we do hearts and minds. Australian soldiers do hearts and minds very well. And what I mean by that is building rapport with those in the community that we're trying to protect. We didn't do that to the standard clearly that was required to break Taliban's hold over a lot of the areas that we're in. Some of that comes down to the resources that we had available. But we did the best that we could with the resources we had.
How, looking back now, do you feel, knowing that you've sort of contributed to these people's lives in that way, what's your concern for the local people that worked with you? Were you in a situation where you had some of those official local supporters working with you, or do you know of any? And what's the feeling now? And
yeah, look, absolutely. I know. Look, we want to help, right? I know that that we want to increase the limit. I think there's 3,000 at the moment. Talking about 3,000 Afghanis. We're potentially looking at taking in interpreters, those that are directly helped. I would caution is my word, straight out there, throw caution to those in the position of making these decisions. I can give you a number of examples. The first one is that the Afghan National Army commander that was responsible for those soldiers when I was at Anna Joy, which is the VC action, if you will, that I was nominated and later received the Victoria Cross for my actions on the ground. The reason that contact was so big and the way it played out is because the Afghan National Army commander was feeding information to the Taliban. He was an insider. We didn't find this out until after the fact. There's other stories, so many other stories out there of interpreters who go through a very strict process of ensuring that, let's be honest, the criteria is pretty tough for an Afghan reporter, an interpreter to get that job. Those individuals have led coalition forces into IEDs, into Taliban ambushes. So when I say caution, if we're going to start opening the doors to the refugees of Afghanistan, we really need to look at the individuals that we're bringing into the country. I want to help, but I also have experienced the other side of that, where I don't want to import the problems of Afghanistan into Australia, because that's why I went there in the first place, is to stop that flow of terrorism.
Yeah, that's a very important point, no doubt, and a risk that I think a lot of people are probably not talking about just yet because they don't understand the complexity of the situation. Your Victoria Cross, tell us a little bit about how that came about and what that experience was for you.
Yeah, look, I mean, for me, it's not a throwaway line, but I was just doing my job. Like, I found myself in a situation whereby I had an Australian soldier that had been injured, who'd been shot. And when I heard that first come over the radio, I didn't think much of it. I've had guys get back in the fight, in fact. It had been taken a round to the arm. And I remember I was in contact at this point in time myself and getting shot at. I remember looking over to my left-hand side and here this soldier was lying on the ground on his back, which I thought was quite unusual. Probably had 5 soldiers around him. One of them was doing CPR, literally on his knees on top of a hill, exposing his position to enemy fire. Another soldier that was next to that guy has grabbed this guy doing CPR by his helmet and has ripped his helmet down just as a burst of machine gun fire would have went straight through where his chest was. I remember seeing this and thinking, someone needs to act, someone needs to do something. And I was a commander on the ground, so I chose to act. And for me, the only thing that I could do, because we had fire support, we had labs, armoured vehicles firing 25 mil high explosive rounds, we had the support that was required up until that point, and it wasn't working. The Taliban was still coming at us. So I made a decision to try and draw enemy fire onto myself. It must have been a great plan because I had an Australian soldier next to me and I conveyed what I was about to do to him. And I still remember the look on his face. But I remember standing up, hearing that very familiar sound of a bullet as it travels past your head. It's like a whip cracking. Hearing that and start running along this hill. The purpose behind this was to draw enemy fire away. And it's one of those things that worked. I did that run, if you will, 40 to 50 meters 3 times. And it's like if you're watering the garden with a garden hose of bullets hitting around my mate and the team that was trying to treat him whilst they're trying to drag him off the hill, to then switching to me, a target that was out in the open, and following me repeatedly on the hill. And it was enough, that action was enough to be able to drag him off the hill and provide further care. I then proceeded to get back into the fight after that for another sort of 2 hours. So it was 3 and a bit hours in total. There's lots of things that happened that day, but for that specific action, and I suppose others as well, I was nominated for the highest honour and award in the Australian Awards and Awards system. Incredibly humbled to receive that, without a doubt, because I was, as I said, just doing my job.
And what's it like when you come home? You know, you're going into those experiences. It's very hard for people who are not serving or haven't served, to understand, I guess, what it's like to see that side of life, that side of the world. And then you come back to a place like Australia, where the priorities and values are very, very different. Is that sort of the crux of why a lot of guys have a lot of trouble when they come back? And it must just be a bit of a, a bit mind blowing, when you get back to sort of see the environment that we live in and the things that we take for granted, like our freedom, not being appreciated the way that perhaps, it should be after you've been and experienced something like that.
Look, I put a lot of thought into this because I'm very fortunate about my upbringing, and resilience was instilled in me at a very young age, and through my experiences certainly in defence, I was very fortunate. I set out a lot to do a United Nations peacekeeping operation, then go to Iraq, then multiple trips to Afghanistan. So I suppose eased me into all these experiences. Even me, with the character that I have, there was a transitional period without a doubt that took weeks sometimes. I know, even though I was back in Australia, after coming back from Afghan, I would scan the side of the road because you are so used to scanning the road for IEDs. You would, if you went out in public and you sat in a restaurant, you would sit in the corner so you could see entries and exits, so you could see who was coming out. It's about changing those patterns, and it takes a little while, because that's what you use, those things you use to stay alive, to identify threats, and it takes a while. And my thinking around this is those that continue to struggle after their service, they haven't had that ability to turn that off, and they continue to worry, they continue to think about the what if, and they forget that they're back in Australia and it's safe and it's back to normal. That's my personal thoughts on that. But for me, I've been through that transition of experiencing that heightened awareness to then getting back to what is normal.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it's, 90% of it, 99% of it is unconscious, right? I mean, that's the train condition response. So the brain's just doing its thing, and, you go into those automatic reflexes. And for some people, I guess that'll pass in a certain amount of time. Other people, it doesn't. It takes a little bit longer, depending on how the old brain's wired, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But it must be hard for guys who are feeling like, oh, gee, there's something wrong with me. They shouldn't be so hard on themselves, right? Because, I mean, that's a sign of how well they were trained, how professional they are, So every time they catch themselves reacting like that, good idea to sort of pat yourself on the back and say, well, I've done a good job, and obviously I was well trained, and it's going to take a little while for this to reset. That's all.
Every new environment, no matter where you are in the world, no matter what you experience, a new job, for example, perfect example. Of course, there's apprehension. There's things of different process procedures. It's normal. It is normal. So give yourself a break. Absolutely.
Well, especially with the pressure that you guys are under. I mean, it's extraordinary pressure that none of us can really relate to who've not been in a war zone. I mean, it's just it's off the charts in terms of job risk. So, you know, you're deliberately putting yourself in harm's way. That's enormous. And I think I would really hope that the guys don't feel that's not as understood or appreciated as it should be in Australia, because it is it is something that I think a lot of people are just in awe of, the ability and the skill and the bravery that fundamental bravery that sort of that stuff takes. So it's gut wrenching to think that there are vets out there who might think that their days in Afghanistan were in vain, because
God, from someone like myself who, as I said, who has, I would say, I suppose, a distinguished career, I'm telling you it is absolutely worth it. And if you are struggling with the current events and you're questioning things, Open Arms is a great place to reach out to and talk to.
I mean, we talk a lot about the suffering that guys go through when they come back. It's not universal though, is it? And there are, there's still great reasons to serve and to get involved in the military if you're that way inclined. What would be your advice to any youngsters out there who are thinking of stepping into a military career?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I joined up. So without a doubt, I joined up through circumstance in a way. Low socioeconomic proof. I didn't have a whole range of options when I was a kid, but I had a grandfather that I looked up to. He was my hero, without a doubt, motivated me, inspired me to join defence and to get out of the situation I was in. But I loved it. I wouldn't have stayed for over a decade. I would have kept on going back on tours if it didn't resonate with me. And the most amazing job satisfaction for helping others around the world, certainly on humanitarian aid missions, United Nations supporting that as well. So I would say absolutely check it out. There are so many different options, so many different corps, whether it be in the Navy, the Army, or the Air Force. So I would highly recommend, if you're thinking that way, to at least have a look to see the options that are available to you.
All right. Dan, thanks heaps for joining us. Take care.
Thank you so much.
And that is it for our 60th first anniversary episode of The Other Side. Thanks to all of you who supported us and helped us grow by spreading the word over the year, especially my Twitter tweets. Please like, subscribe, and share the show. Remember to send us an email at theothersideost@gmail.com, theothersideost@gmail.com, asking to be added to our VIP WhatsApp group, and I'll send you the link to opt in to that. It's not a chat group, it's just a broadcast one-way group, and we send out just the link to each episode for you, so you won't get more than sort of 2 or 3 messages coming at you in a week. So nice and easy to do. You can unsubscribe anytime you like. Now also subscribe to our platform, Discernible with an A, at discernible.io, and you can catch all the other great content. The People's Project, and all of Matt's interviews, Josh's stuff as well. So there's heaps of good stuff out there, and Emily as well on the People's Project. So lots of good content for you. We're going to take a little break. We'll be back next week, around about Wednesday night. So have a few great days, and we will see you again next week with episode 61. Bye for now.